Our relationship. I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more.
Yeah. We did 72 of those shows.
On a Sunday night in the fall of 1967, millions of American families sat down in front of their television sets expecting a light comedy variety hour. What they got instead was a flash of white light, a wall of smoke, a drummer thrown backward off his riser, and a guitarist stumbling across the stage with his hair standing on end. For a split second, the picture wobbled. The audience gasped, then screamed, then laughed nervously, unsure if they had just watched an accident or a stunt. CBS's censors had reviewed nearly every line of dialogue that went out on this show. They had cut songs, trimmed jokes, and rewritten sketches. But on this particular night, something got through that no one at the network had fully understood was coming. It wasn't a scripted gag. It wasn't a special effect dreamed up by a props department. It was real gunpowder, real shrapnel, and real damage that would follow one of the men on that stage for the rest of his life. And it happened on a show that had already spent months proving it was willing to say things American television had never dared to say before. To understand why that single explosive moment mattered so much, you have to go back further than 1967, back to a show that almost didn't happen, hosted by two brothers who almost didn't become entertainers at all. Tom and Dick Smothers grew up without a father. Their dad, an Army officer, had been stationed overseas when the Second World War reached the Pacific, and he did not come home. The boys were raised by their mother, who worked long hours to keep the family afloat while Tom and Dick came of age in California. That kind of loss leaves a mark, and by most accounts it shaped the way the brothers later approached the world. Skeptical of authority, quick to find the absurd in hard situations, and unwilling to simply accept things because someone in charge told them to. Their path into show business started almost by accident. Tom put together a small musical group in college, and when the other members drifted away one by one, only Tom and Dick were left standing, one on guitar and one on an upright bass he had barely learned to play. To fill the dead air between songs, they started bantering, needling each other in the exaggerated, wounded way real siblings do. Audiences responded to that teasing more than they responded to the music itself. Tom played the wide-eyed innocent. Dick played the exasperated straight man. The line that would follow them for the rest of their careers, Tom's plaintive complaint that their mother had always liked Dick better, grew out of nights spent simply trying to entertain a room, not out of some calculated bit written by a team of writers. That act found a real audience at a small nightclub in San Francisco at the start of the 1960s. Booked for what was supposed to be a short engagement, the brothers became such a draw that their run stretched on for months, and their pay climbed from almost nothing to a very comfortable weekly wage. A live album followed, and with it, a national profile. By the middle of the decade, Tom and Dick Smothers were recognizable names in comedy and folk music alike, known for a blend of gentle musicianship and sharp-tongued sibling rivalry that felt utterly harmless on the surface. By 1966, CBS had a problem. Its Sunday night schedule was getting crushed by NBC's Western drama bonanza, a ratings juggernaut that had already knocked out other CBS programs sent up against it. Desperate to find something that could compete, and eager to capture younger viewers who were drifting away from traditional variety television, network executives turned to the Smothers Brothers. On paper, it looked like a safe bet. Two clean-cut young men in blazers, a folk duo with an act built on brotherly bickering, nothing that looked remotely dangerous to a network's image. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered in February of 1967. Tom Smothers had negotiated a surprising amount of creative control before signing on, a concession CBS made because it badly needed a hit. That single contractual detail turned out to matter enormously, because Tom and the show's writers had no intention of making a conventional variety program. Within its first weeks on the air, the show was already beating Bonanza in the ratings among younger viewers, and it kept climbing from there. But it was also becoming clear to CBS executives that they had signed up for something far more provocative than they had bargained for. The writers' room quickly filled with talent that would go on to define American comedy for decades. Steve Martin got some of his earliest professional work there. So did Rob Reiner. A young writer named Lorne Michaels, who would later create Saturday Night Live, cut his teeth crafting material for the show. David Steinberg became known for delivering pointed, satirical monologues that pushed at the edges of what CBS considered acceptable. These were not people interested in safe, toothless jokes about mothers-in-law. They wanted to write about the Vietnam War, about politicians, about the widening gap between generations. And week after week, they found ways to smuggle that material past the network standards department, or to make an open joke out of the fact that they had been stopped. Part of what made the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour so unusual was its music booking. This was not a program interested in safe, orchestral pop acts. Between 1967 and 1969, the show gave national television time to Buffalo Springfield, Jefferson Airplane, Simon and Garfunkel, Steppenwolf, The Doors, and The Who, acts that most variety programs of the era wouldn't have touched. Jefferson Airplane performed a song built around anxiety over nuclear annihilation. Buffalo Springfield brought a protest anthem about generational conflict into American living rooms. These were not the kind of guests booked by shows chasing a comfortable, older demographic. They were booked by a show that wanted its studio audience, and its home audience, to feel the same restlessness that was spreading across college campuses and city streets in the late 1960s. It was into this environment that The Who arrived in September of 1967, fresh off their first American hit single and looking to make an impression on a country that barely knew who they were yet. The Who had built a reputation in Britain for a particular kind of finale. Guitars smashed against amplifiers, drum kits kicked apart, a controlled chaos that turned destruction into a kind of performance art. Keith Moon, the band's drummer, had a habit of rigging a small explosive charge inside one of his bass drums to go off at the climax of a song, a theatrical flourish meant to punctuate the mayhem with a bang. For the Smothers Brothers taping, Moon wanted something bigger than the dress rehearsal had produced. According to the show's own production team, the rehearsal explosion had been underwhelming, more of a dull thump and a puff of smoke than the dramatic bang everyone wanted. So Moon reportedly worked with the show's effects crew to add more charge to the drum, without realizing that members of his own band had separately asked for the same thing from their side. Nobody fully coordinated how much explosive material ended up packed into that kit. When the taping rolled and The Who launched into My Generation, the band worked itself into its usual frenzy. Guitars struck against amplifiers, drums toppled from their stands, feedback shrieking through the studio. As the song reached its final crescendo, Moon kicked the loaded bass drum. The resulting blast was far larger than anyone expected. A sheet of white light and smoke tore across the stage. Moon was thrown backward off his drum riser, and shrapnel from a shattered cymbal cut into his arm. Guitarist Pete Townshend, standing closer to the blast than anyone, had his hair singed and was left with a ringing in his ears that, by his own later account, never fully went away. Vocalist Roger Daltrey staggered downstage through the smoke. Only bassist John Entwistle appeared to keep his composure through the chaos. Amid the confusion, Townshend, still dazed, grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and smashed it against the stage floor, an improvised addition to the mayhem that Smothers hadn't agreed to and didn't see coming. He later said he was too busy checking whether anyone had actually been hurt to register that his own instrument had just been destroyed in front of a national audience. What had been planned as a loud theatrical finale had become something closer to a genuine accident, one that left real physical damage on at least one member of the band and a permanent piece of rock folklore for everyone who witnessed it. For younger viewers watching at home, the sequence played as pure electricity, proof that something on television could still feel dangerous and unscripted. For older viewers, and for CBS executives already nervous about the show's growing reputation, it played as one more example of a program that had slipped out of the network's control. The footage did not get cut for being too politically pointed, the way so many other segments on this show eventually would. It aired because nobody involved in reviewing the tape fully grasped what they were looking at until it was already too late to stop it. That is what makes it such a striking piece of television history. A moment of complete, unfiltered reality that slid past a censorship apparatus built specifically to prevent exactly that kind of surprise. The explosion was dramatic, but it wasn't the only moment on this show that revealed just how tightly CBS was trying to control what America saw. Folk singer Pete Seeger had been effectively frozen out of network television for close to 2 decades after being blacklisted during the anti-communist fervor of the early 1950s. When the Smothers Brothers invited him to perform in the fall of 1967, it marked his first appearance on commercial network television in years. Seeger chose to sing a song about a platoon of soldiers wading deeper and deeper into a river on the orders of a captain who insists the water isn't over their heads yet, only to have the captain himself drown in the current. The song's final verses, added specifically to comment on the escalating war in Vietnam, drew an unmistakable line from the story to President Lyndon Johnson's decision-making. CBS asked Seeger to cut the most pointed verse. He refused, and the network responded by pulling the performance from the broadcast entirely. The decision did not sit quietly. Word of the censored performance reached the press, and public pressure built quickly enough that CBS relented. Several months later, Seeger was invited back, and this time his full, uncensored performance aired to a national audience. It stands as one of the earliest instances of a blacklisted performer using mainstream American television to directly criticize a sitting president's foreign policy, and it happened only because Tom Smothers was willing to make the fight public rather than quietly accept the network's decision. Seeger's battle was far from the last. Folk singer and activist Joan Baez appeared on the show hoping to dedicate a song to her husband, who had just been sentenced to prison for refusing induction into the military in protest of the Vietnam War. CBS trimmed her introduction down to almost nothing before allowing the segment to air, stripping away the specific reason her husband had been jailed and leaving only a vague gesture toward the dedication. It was a small edit in terms of running time, but a telling one in terms of what the network considered too politically charged for a Sunday night comedy hour. The following season brought an even sharper example. Harry Belafonte taped a performance of a Caribbean-tinged protest song while footage played behind him showing police confronting demonstrators outside the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. CBS refused to air any of it, cutting the entire segment and leaving the broadcast 5 minutes short. Rather than fill that gap with something else from the show, the network sold the open airtime to the Republican Party for campaign advertising, a decision that turned a segment meant to protest political violence into paid time for the very political apparatus being criticized. It is hard to imagine a clearer illustration of where CBS's priorities actually sat once advertisers and political pressure entered the picture. By this point, President Johnson had reportedly phoned CBS executives directly to complain about the show's content, staying up late into the night to press his case. Richard Nixon, once he took office, kept up similar pressure. The show's writers and producers were operating under the direct, if usually unstated, scrutiny of the White House itself, which is an extraordinary thing to say about a program ostensibly built around banjo music and sibling banter. As the second and third seasons wore on, CBS's internal review process became increasingly aggressive. Scripts, song lyrics, and full videotapes all had to be submitted well in advance of airing, giving network censors time to comb through every line for anything touching on Vietnam, religion, drugs, or partisan politics. The turnaround demands were brutal, often requiring last-minute rewrites just hours before broadcast. The show's writers grew so frustrated with the process that they built a sketch mocking it directly. Tom playing an overzealous censor, snipping performers off mid-sentence with an oversized pair of scissors, the joke landing squarely on the absurdity of being silenced in real time. CBS refused to air it. A similarly self-referential sketch written by guest performer Elaine May, ending on a line about being reduced to hollow, meaningless jokes if real commentary wasn't allowed, met the same fate. The show had reached a point where even making fun of its own censorship had become too dangerous to broadcast. Tom and the writing staff responded by playing a kind of brinkmanship with CBS's deadlines, sometimes submitting a tame version of an episode for review and then swapping in sharper material at the last possible moment before air. It was a way of clawing back some control in a situation where almost every other lever had been taken away from them, and it infuriated network executives who felt, not unreasonably, that they were being deliberately outmaneuvered. That tension reached its breaking point in the spring of 1969. CBS announced it was canceling the show, officially citing the brothers' failure to deliver a tape on time for the network's standard pre-broadcast review. On paper, it was a contractual dispute. In practice, almost no one believed that was the real reason, especially given that the show was still pulling strong ratings and had just been renewed for another season only weeks earlier. An episode already in the can, featuring a religious-themed monologue from David Steinberg that CBS considered too irreverent for an Easter broadcast, was pulled entirely from American airwaves and never shown domestically, though it did air in Canada. The fallout was immediate and public. The New York Times ran a scathing editorial accusing CBS of holding the Smothers Brothers hostage to their own creative instincts. Letters of protest poured into the network. Fellow performers spoke out in support of Tom and Dick. What had started as a dispute over one comedy show had turned into a broader argument about free expression on American television, at a moment when the country itself was deeply split over the war, over civil rights, and over how much dissent a mainstream broadcast medium should be allowed to carry. Advertisers played their own quiet role in the outcome. Major sponsors, wary of being associated with a show that kept generating political controversy, began pulling their ad dollars, and the resulting financial pressure on CBS was significant. It became clear that even a top-rated program could be sacrificed if enough advertisers got nervous, a lesson that rippled through the television industry for years afterward. Tom and Dick did not simply accept the cancellation. They sued CBS for breach of contract, arguing that the network had reneged on an agreement it had already renewed. The legal fight dragged on for roughly 4 years. In 1973, a judge ruled in the brothers' favor, awarding them a settlement worth several $100,000 at the time, a sum that would translate to millions in today's money. The ruling mattered less for the dollar figure than for the precedent it set. A network could not simply invoke a minor contractual technicality as cover for pulling a show over its political content. It was, by any measure, a win. But it was also a hollow one in certain respects. The Smothers Brothers had already lost the platform that made them culturally significant in the first place, and no amount of court-ordered compensation could restore the specific moment in television history that their show had occupied. Subsequent projects on other networks, including brief runs on ABC and later NBC, never managed to recapture the same energy or cultural relevance. Tom in particular struggled with the loss for years afterward, describing the end of the original show as something that shook his confidence deeply. CBS, for its part, filled the vacant time slot with Hee-Haw, a folksy, apolitical country comedy show that offered none of the satire or controversy of its predecessor and went on to run for over 2 decades, a quiet testament to just how much easier it was for a network to profit from something safe.